UFOs, or unidentified flying objects, have been a hot topic for controversy and debate since the first recorded report of such an anomaly all the way back in 1440 BCE. That first alleged sighting came from a scribe of Thutmose III, Tully. He recorded seeing a fiery disk in the sky. This, however, would be challenged by the Condon Committee, the University of Colorado UFO project, in the 1960s, claiming, and I quote, Tully was taken in and the papyrus is a fake. Many, many more sightings would be recorded throughout history. Even today in 2021, we see a constant stream of news reports where people genuinely believe they are seeing something that can't be logically explained in our skies. The solar system is vast, and it makes the mind wonder if we are truly the only sentient beings in the universe. That brings me to the story we will be discussing today. A local police officer from here in Wisconsin relayed a story right out of an Orson Welles broadcast. Today we will talk about UFOs in Wisconsin. Hey guys, welcome back to the Wisconsin Files. Today we are talking about UFO sightings here in the state, and there are plenty to talk about. So today's first case actually involves a police officer in the entire town of Elmwood, Wisconsin. So it's quite a ride. Let's buckle up and get into it. Our story begins in Elmwood, Wisconsin, 1975. Elmwood has a population of less than 1,000 people according to its 2010 census. This is a quiet, ordinary American small town. That is until the people inhabiting this village began having a series of bizarre sightings. One in particular involving one of the town's police officers, Officer George Wheeler. These occurrences would gain the town the title of UFO capital of Wisconsin. Many years later, two other Wisconsin cities would fight Elmwood for that title, but we all know that Elmwood was where it all began. On the night of April 7th, 1975, on-duty Officer Wheeler was patrolling the silent town when he caught sight of what he originally thought was a plane on fire. He realized it was a massive, bright orange UFO. He also would make note of a hose hanging from the craft. He believed perhaps it was using the power lines below it as a charging unit. He would go on to say that this UFO was as big as a football field. And this also wouldn't be Officer Wheeler's last sighting of this aircraft. So I've honestly been really excited to talk about just UFOs, aliens, extraterrestrials. I'm all for it. So today we are discussing the case of Elmwood, the very first alien sightings or UFO sightings in Elmwood, and also alien sightings. People had also, well, one specific person believes they saw shadowy alien figures inside of a spacecraft. So we're going to start with that story. So the year was 1975, and Officer George Wheeler was a very seasoned veteran. He had gone through combat in World War II as he was an air pilot, so he was very, very familiar with, military craft, things that he would be able to identify, something of military material. And what George would see was certainly something he had never seen before. And so this isn't a guy that's easily swayed to believe the paranormal per se. And this episode leaves George an absolute believer, and probably the entire town of Elmwood, Wisconsin. It's actually April 7th, 1975, and George Wheeler is on patrol, and he is believing to see a plane on fire. This is what he thinks at first he is seeing. And upon further inspecting whatever is coming out of the sky, he describes it as this bright orange, fiery craft, and it's plummeting pretty quickly down to earth. And so he follows kind of the way that it's coming down, and then it just stops and it is hovering in, it's suspended in midair, and George is completely baffled at what he's seeing. And then it takes off, and this would be the first sighting of many sightings to come. And let's get into a little bit about Elmwood. So Elmwood's a very small town. It's a population of 800 people in the 2010 census. So back in 1975, I'm gonna guess that there was probably a lot less than even that. So we are well under the 1,000 population mark. So these people, it's a pretty quiet town. They don't get a lot of action out there, and clearly people aren't about to, I guess, it's crazy because multiple people that didn't even converse that day, I mean, were seeing the same thing, or didn't even, they concluded afterwards they had all seen the exact same thing. George believes he sees a plane crashing, so of course, being a cop, he's trying to, rationalize what he's seeing, but come on, this is just, it's so wild to me, because I mean, you would think somebody familiar with military, he's not gonna, why, what does he have to gain to make something up like this? It's not really, it doesn't, it does put Elmwood on the map, that's for sure, but I mean, people think, you get a lot of stigma when it comes to these sort of things, especially in the 70s, I'm sure people were still fairly close-minded. George himself even admits to being such, and after this, he's a confirmed believer. Just a few weeks after the anniversary of his first sighting, Officer Wheeler once more would see a UFO on April 22nd, 1976. This time, it was a much more intense encounter that would solidify his belief in extraterrestrials. Just as before, Officer Wheeler was patrolling the town when again, he believed he saw some form of a fire. He went to the quarry on the south side of town, and as George was closing in on the alleged fire, he realized he was seeing the exact same massive orange UFO that he had seen a year previously. He described the object as being 250 feet wide and that it was suspended in the air just above the ground. As Wheeler radioed the other officers and was relaying what he was seeing, George's radio mysteriously died. And not only his radio, but his car and the spark plugs, everything. Wheeler said just before everything died, he witnessed shadowy figures in the seemingly translucent bright orange UFO. He then went in and out of consciousness, and his memory is very vague. Okay, so George Wheeler, seasoned military veteran who's very familiar with aircraft, being a pilot. Also seasoned veteran, been in the law enforcement game since he got out of World War II, and now it's 1975, and I think he's in his 50s at this point. So, I mean, he's also described as being just very, very level-headed, very grounded in reality. So for him to be radioing that he's on his radio talking to his other, because there isn't a lot of officers too, because Elmwood, again, it's such a small, town, so there's no need for a very large police force, and so it's just George and a couple of others that kind of run the show. And even the chief of police, Officer Gene Helmer, he also had a part-time job at the local nursing home. So again, this is just a really small, close-knit community. Everybody kind of knows each other, and they all confirm that none of these people had anything to gain to make up what they had seen. And also, people outside of Elmwood would also witness similar events, and so this kind of corroborates with their story in Elmwood. Anyways, so obviously what George witnessed that day, he obviously comes to the conclusion that, okay, what I saw was not an airplane on fire. This was this was a UFO. And now, fast forward, time passes a little bit, and also there are plenty other eyewitness reports that I'm going to cover in later videos about other people that had these encounters very similar to what these people in Elmwood encountered. Now we are in April 22nd of 1976. And at this point, things have kind of calmed down. The sightings are a little less frequent. But again, we have Officer George Wheeler believing now what he is seeing is a fire, like a brush fire starting over by the quarry, like outside of town, in the southern part of town. And immediately he gets in his car and he's radioing back to the station that he believes he's seeing a fire and he's going to go investigate. He gets to the site, and once again, George is confronted with the same UFO craft from exactly almost a year to date. Just a couple weeks difference in the anniversary of when he saw his first UFO. And so now, as he, closes in and he's radioing, he's describing back on this police scanner that he's seeing something described as a bright orange translucent craft, and he's seeing shadowy figures. And as he's describing this, all his electronics in the car go dead. the battery, the spark plugs, everything blows out, and not only in George's car, but other houses in the surrounding areas. 3 other residents confirmed that their TVs turned off, as well as like phone lines. There was massive interference for a solid 10 minutes with other people in this close surrounding area. And now George obviously raising the alarm, other people that were listening on the police scanner, and also Gene Helmer was listening to the police scanner, as was Officer George Wheeler's wife. So they're all well informed about what, the events that are unfolding currently. And so everybody's driving to George's location. And also there's, I think, 2 other officers that have also were on, the radio with George as he was describing this, and they confirmed that, all signal cuts out on George's radio on his end. And George said he hears a loud, like, and it was so loud for like 45 seconds, and he goes like in and out of consciousness. When they find George, everybody arrives on the scene there, and also they had called the nursing home to report, they were trying to get a hold of the chief. And while they're on the phone with the nursing home, the resident that was working, because Gene worked there part-time, said that he wasn't there, but he looks out the window as they're describing what's happening, and he also witnesses this same fiery orange craft. And they're all in shock, and everybody shows up on the scene, and they find George in a semi-conscious state. Chief of Police Gene Helmer said when Officer Wheeler was located, he was in a somnolent state. It was also reported that indeed George's cruiser's spark plugs and battery had all been burned out, and the vehicle would not start. Around this precise moment, 3 other residents said that their televisions turned off without a reason and would not turn back on for 10 minutes. And there was also one more reported sighting from a Paul Fredrickson. Fredrickson was the administrator for the local nursing home where Chief Gene Helmer actually worked part-time. Paul said a phone call came in frantically looking for the chief and detailed the UFO situation that was currently unfolding. Paul then went and looked out his window to see exactly what the cops were seeing. Officer Wheeler was a seasoned vet to the force, working law enforcement for a long time. He was also known as a no-nonsense kind of guy, grounded in reality. These occurrences were said to change him, and he never again would question the idea of aliens existing. He even strongly believed that these extraterrestrials were here to bring us harm. Coherent. And so his wife takes him home, and he's evaluated by the town's doctor, but things don't get better for George. He actually starts suffering from bad headaches, and he's getting horrible nightmares. So bad that he needed to be committed to the hospital for 11 days. And they could not find anything that would, cause these reactions he was having. And so unfortunately, only 6 months after this incident, George Wheeler would subsequently die. Now, did he die from some exposure to something that they didn't pick up in their tests, their extensive lab works? Who knows? But it was said, Gene Helmer reported that Officer Wheeler was a solid man. He was, like I said before, a no-nonsense kind of guy, grounded in reality, wasn't one to, feed into fables and such. And so he honestly, genuinely believed that George had seen this spacecraft he described, and all of them too. There was many other witnesses to exactly what George had experienced, and also the police chief himself. So everybody confirms that this did take place, and this, you guys, it's crazy because there are a bunch of other eyewitness reports as these are taking place that nobody had really connected until well after the fact. But other people too were coming out saying how they had seen exactly what, and like I said, we've got a laundry list of sightings here. But this is just one in a number of them. Now, after all of these events took place, understandably so, Wheeler was quite shaken up. He would have to stay in a hospital for a few days, and he would undergo a series of tests that the doctors ultimately concluded he was fine and discharged him. A couple of days later, he would return complaining of severe headaches and terrible nightmares. He would remain this time for 11 days, and again, doctors could find no logical explanation for his symptoms. It was said his mental health was good, but strangely, not long after this, it seemed to deteriorate so fast. George Wheeler had all but forgot the details of what happened on either occasion. So, just what the hell happened those days in Elmwood? Did the people really receive a visit from some extraterrestrial beings? Were they simply military craft or misidentified aircraft of some sort? Then, how do we account for the power surge and nightmares and the amount of witnesses that came forward? We probably will never know, and maybe some things are better left a mystery. You know, what's kind of crazy is that if anything we've noticed in 2021 is that the government isn't exactly being quiet about UFOs anymore, or the idea of extraterrestrials possibly existing out there. I do find it pretty insane the amount of people that have similar experiences, you know, and even researching for this case, I was kind of diving back into like old reports all the way back into ancient Egypt through the Roman times. Like, there have always been people that witness seeing something in the skies, and it just leaves you wondering, what exactly are they seeing? I mean, it absolutely intrigues me, and I just love these stories. You guys know that I love anything pretty much paranormal and unsolved, unexplained. I'm there for it, and I'm here to deliver to you guys. Like I kind of said before, these sightings are on the rise. People just not far from me in Waukesha, Wisconsin, have been reporting seeing, you know, these bright lights in the sky moving in formation, as well as over Lake Michigan. And numerous reports are coming in, and so like I said, I can't wait, because I'm covering a bunch. I'm gonna try to cover as many as I possibly can, because they're just, and the theories that tie into these, you know, some of them kind of like people try to connect them to these missing person cases in our state national parks, which is a whole nother rabbit hole, which I'm absolutely fascinated by. It keeps your mind wondering, you know, like, what is really going on out there, as well as, like, you know, these conspiracy theories, like, or are they just military craft? And if they were, then how is it that these people, in times where this technology didn't even exist, how is it that they've also experienced something, you know, in the skies, such as describing disc-like crafts, or, you know, speaking with these higher beings? Who knows? I keep an open mind on anything, because I just feel like the possibilities, you never know. But yeah, I mean, I guess that's really all there was to that case alone. But again, so around the same area, just not far from there in Wausau, there was a sighting from another police officer. Yes, another cop. But this cop grabs a Polaroid camera, and this is also in the 70s, and he has the sense to take photographs. And they are some of the best photographs in UFO history. I honestly don't know how these pictures aren't more more recognized. I really have never seen them covered before. In a few other videos, yes, but like, you would think the popularity of them would be just bigger, because they are incredible, and I'm going to show you those in just a moment. Tell me if this date sounds eerily familiar. On April 19th, 1978, one officer, Mark Coltrane, was on duty cruising through the town of Colfax, Wisconsin. As Officer Coltrane pulled his vehicle over and was about to radio in his plans to take lunch, his radio began emitting loud crackling noises. As Mark looked out of his car window, his attention would be caught by what he would describe as a metallic disc-shaped object. The officer quickly grabbed his Polaroid camera and snapped these sensational photographs you see. The UFO was then observed flying away with extreme speed. Coltrane was so astonished with what he witnessed, it took him a couple of hours to compose himself and report what just took place. And I would also like to mention, in Wisconsin during the 60s and 70s, numerous police reports and eyewitness accounts were flooding news outlets and police stations, from hundreds of people claiming they all seen a UFO or had a very similar encounter. A good chunk of these cases actually came from police officers themselves, such as George Wheeler and Mark Coltrane. In this case, the photographs taken by Officer Coltrane in 1978 were a short 40-minute drive from Elmwood, Wisconsin, where Officer Wheeler's sighting took place. In my next video, I will be going into a much more thorough detail of these other accounts in the surrounding areas. I find it absolutely intriguing that these are taking place, or they did, and they even are, because there's a huge spike in UFO reports here in Wisconsin currently happening. And I think, early June 2021, even the Pentagon addresses some of this. So, very interesting indeed, and it keeps your mind wandering. Thank you guys so much for listening. So, and I guess too, when we get these reports from police officers as our eyewitnesses, it kind of gives it a little more credit, you know, because like you tend to believe, you know, cops are they have to be level-headed and keep a, you know, very realistic view on things, and just the idea of this stuff happening to some of our most hardened people, it's so intense. But yeah, so yeah, that wraps up the case of George Wheeler and the entire town of Elmwood site. Yeah, there really isn't much more to say. It's unfortunate that George passed away not long after the episode, but I cannot wait till the next video, because like I said, I have other cases from around the area that have similar stories and also pretty convincing evidence, as you guys saw, and we will get into that so much more in the next video, and I will catch you all there.